Hi, I'm Paul.
Hello, I'm Neil, and this is another installment of educational videos from Elk Castle Shooting Sports.
Neil, how you doing? I took
Good.
your advice when we started talking about deer rifles.
All right.
I went and looked through. I bought me a Winchester Model 70 featherweight 30-06.
I support your decision, sir.
Now, optics. I just went through the store and I looked, and we have optics galore. We have everything from standard Weavers to Swarovskis, Zeiss.
Got them coming out our ears, basically, is what you're trying
Yeah,
to say.
what am I choosing now? I don't plan on shooting far, but what do you recommend?
Well, when it comes to optics, you're going to take a few things into consideration. First of all, buy the best glass you can afford to put on your gun, because you can't hit what you can't see. If all you can afford is a $100 scope, buy the best $100 scope you can find, save your money, and put something better on it next year. What you don't want to do is end up with a $1,000 rifle and a $50 scope.
All right. Well,
If you were flying a jet fighter, you wouldn't put 87 octane gas in it, right?
no, actually
Okay.
that'd be kind of different. But the interesting thing is I'm looking at all these have finishes, but the finishes are different. My barrel's got a blue barrel.
Okay, you're going to want to match the finish to the rifle, so you probably get something like this. Most people, more and more, are going to the non-glare matte finish rifles because they don't want something shiny out in the woods. So we've been selling a lot more of the matte finish type scopes. First thing you want to consider when you're buying a scope for a rifle is what power do you want. I find that typically something in the 2.5 to 8, 3 to 9 power range is going to be more than adequate for most hunting rifles. The longest shot I've ever taken on a deer was about 220 yards, and my 16 power scope was actually set on 6 power, and I had no trouble making the shot. If you're going to be doing significant shots at long range, you want to go with a higher power scope, something in the 4 to 12 or 16 range, but you also don't want to get too heavy a scope. Case in point, this is my Burris Signature scope. I bought this a while back and I love it. Burris Signature are phenomenal optics. But I put it on a featherweight rifle, and I do a lot of stalk hunting on the lease where I'm at currently, and this thing weighs slightly less than my car. It's a heavy scope. So you want to kind of match the power of the scope to the application. You don't want to put something too big on it.
So you're telling me quite possibly I can put a good balanced rifle, getting it fitted, and put an overburdening scope on it, and it will affect my shot?
Absolutely. Now, if you're going to be sitting in a blind and you have 300, 400, 500 yard shots, a distinct possibility, absolutely buy a beast like this one and put it on there. The quality of optics, people come in looking for scopes and they really don't know where to start a lot of the time. You want to factor in power, like I said. When you're budgeting for a scope, the two important qualities about a scope that set them apart from others is going to be how well the glass is made and the lens coatings. That's going to determine things like how clearly you can see, especially at longer distances. And then you also want to consider eye relief. Cheap scopes do not have much eye relief. Now let's take this Leupold. This is about a $500 scope, and you can see when I bring it up, I've got a clear field of view right there. I've got a completely full view, but look how far away the scope is from my noggin. Okay? If you get a cheap scope, you're going to bring that thing up, and you've got to get right up on it like that.
Oh, that could hurt.
Yeah, and if you're shooting your 300 Magnum or your 7 mag, you're going to need stitches. So that's something very important to consider. Now, one thing people don't understand about purchasing a scope, especially cheaper scopes, because we see this so often, people budget, they save their money, they buy a really nice rifle, and they put the cheapest scope they can find on it. Well, first of all, you're going to have no eye relief, like I just said. Your field of view is going to be diminished at range. It's not going to be clear. It's not going to be bright. And a lot of people offset that by getting a big objective lens on their scope. Now you, Paul, you walk into a big box sporting goods store and you say, hey, I want to do some low light shooting at deer. And they say, hey, you need a scope with a huge objective on it because it gathers light. Well, that's bogus. Scopes do not gather light. They don't have these little tentacles on the end that are bringing the light in. Scopes transmit light, and they're going to transmit it well based on, again, the quality of the glass and the lens coatings inside it. Okay? If you buy a scope like this Zeiss, you're buying some precision ground glass with the best lens coatings in the industry on it, and it's going to transmit a lot of light. The bigger the objective, the more light it will transmit up to a point. No matter how big the objective lens is on your scope, all that light still has to come down through this tube, which is significantly smaller. Standard scopes with a 1-inch tube don't need anything bigger than about a 42 or 44 millimeter objective. Anything bigger than that is superfluous. You've got more scope than you need. You can make it 100 millimeters wide. It's not going to bring any more light through that tube than a 44 millimeter objective will. When you get to a scope like this one has a thicker tube. It's a 30 millimeter tube. You can go up to a 52, a 54, a 56 objective, and it will transmit more light. You'll get a brighter, clearer picture, especially in low light. The last thing to really consider when you're buying a scope, and here's where one reason you don't want to cheap out on your scope, is something called parallax. If you'd have gone and bought a rifle scope off the shelf back in 1930, it would have had one lens right there and one lens right there. Okay?
All right.
Now, modern scopes, you've got the target, it's 200 yards away or whatever distance. You've got a lens right there, you've got multiple lenses inside, and you've got your eyepiece with 2 lenses, and then you've got your eye, which is the final lens. Do you think there might possibly be some tiny amount of distortion in all that?
Quite possible.
Absolutely. That's called parallax. You can buy a $4,000 Zeiss. It's got parallax in it, which is movement in your reticle at varying ranges. All scopes are set to be parallax free at 100 yards. I took out a rifle to sight in for a gentleman a year ago, and he had bought a very cheap scope. And I don't want to discredit the manufacturer, but it rhymes with Lasco. And he had it on his rifle, and he literally had 14 inches of parallax movement in his scope at 100 yards. That means that without moving my gun or my scope at 100 yards, I could shoot the gun twice and be 14 inches apart.
Wow.
Now, how are you going to hit a deer, right? So that's another reason to not go cheap on your optics. Any scope is going to have small amount of parallax in it. Zeiss, Swarovski, the higher end are going to minimalize it. And then scopes like this have adjustable parallax. In other words, you've got on the objective lens here, you can set this scope to be parallax free by turning this to set it at 100 yards, 150, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way out to infinite.
All right, so that's adjustable.
It's adjustable. You can set it for whatever range you're shooting at.
Outstanding. Now, I also understand that individuals coming out for hunting, and hunting season is coming up in November, El Caso, you can get them mounted, bore-sighted, free with the purchase of the base and rings and the scope. Is that
Absolutely. We will mount and bore sight your gun for free if you buy the optics and rifle from us.
And we can also zero here, can't we?
We can, and we also recommend that if you buy a new rifle and you have a scope put on it, get it bore sighted, but you really need to have it sighted in or sighted in yourself. Bore sighting, all it does is put you on paper at 100 yards, and you could feasibly be off by 12 or 14 inches, even after a good bore sight.
Well, that saves a lot of ammunition.
Yes, it does.
And in essence, saves a whole lot of money. Well, Neil, I appreciate that.
No,
Now I just got to go pick me a scope.
absolutely. Pick that one. It's for sale. Thank you.
I think I'll stick with the Swarovski.